Space Empires 4X is, I think, now the third Hex Encounter wargame to go live on Board Game Arena. The second was Memoir 44, and yes, there will be some content on Memoir 44. This now gives an interesting breadth of material. We have a medium to heavy historical game about an entire conflict in unconditional surrender Europe, an essentially pasted on theme light game in Memoir 44, and a relatively abstracted sci-fi game in Space Empires 4X. It's Space Empires 4X I'll be talking about today. First of all, what is a 4X game? 4X is a general term used to describe a particular type of game. It refers to the words explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. Basically, all 4X games put you in the role of a total jerk colonist. You're moving into territory without regard for its indigenous inhabitants, stealing its resources, and using those resources to shoot other jerks who are also trying to do the same thing. It's a popular genre, as it was a popular historical activity, and Space Empires is a sci-fi themed take on this genre. Though to be fair, the game tends to focus mostly on the last X, the actual fighting with other players, the early parts veering towards the scripted and perfunctory. And today I'm going to be showing the interface and the solo mode of the game. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the developer of the BGA app, not the designer of the game. Most games on Board Game Arena are developed by volunteers. There are some exceptions. Days of Wonder have a lot of money, and Memoir 44 was clearly a funded endeavour, but most games are volunteer efforts, and Unconditional Surrender has been a remarkable example of that. It is by a very wide margin the most complicated game that has been implemented on the platform, and the result is remarkable. The effect on that particular game to have rules enforcement and allow people from around the world to play each other is huge. It has no doubt done a great deal to promote the play of this sort of medium to heavy wargame, and it has had a feedback effect on the rules of that particular game. And it was all achieved through the work of a volunteer developer, LunaLol. My content on the game, which runs to more than 8 hours, I went and checked, would be impossible without this implementation. And it was LunaLol who brought Space Empires 4X to BGA. It was launched to the general users at the end of December. I actually missed its launch, it happened with no fanfare. Consider it a sort of Christmas present to the wargaming community. And again, like Unconditional Surrender, to reiterate, this is entirely a volunteer effort. But after much pestering by users on BGA, LunaLol has agreed to set up a Patreon account. So this is going to be a little bit of an advert for the developer. If you want to, I will have chapter marked in the bottom. You can skip straight to the Space Empires content if you wish to. If you don't know how Patreon works, it is a platform that provides regular income for creators of content, artists, writers, and in this case, wargame developers. You sign up to a payment agreement, a fixed amount of money for each piece that is produced. Then, when the creator produces something new, they ask Patreon to collect a contribution from each patron. This means that individual patrons can sign up for quite modest amounts of money. I signed up before creating this video to pay £5. It also means you're not buying anything. You are lending your financial support for work that is probably not financially viable. It's hard to imagine a way for this sort of work to attract a paid developer. As I said, LunaLol has set up a Patreon account, and as I've said, I've already pledged to pay £5. It is called Wargames Dev on Patreon. They have created several different tiers, 4 dedicated to the 4 different games that they're working on, and yes, they're absolutely still working on Unconditional Surrender. The community on BGA generated so much feedback, effectively intense real-world playtesting, normally impossible for a game like that to get, that it highlighted serious issues, and the designers have attempted to address those, and LunaLol spent what I imagine was about 4 to 6 months last year redesigning the code of Unconditional Surrender on BGA to match the updated rules. So here, in a sense, endeth my pitch for this. As I said, I set up my own contribution, and because you can exert a fair bit of control, I pledged £5, and I limited it to a maximum of once a month without committing to any particular game. I'm not going to suggest you do this if money is tight. Seriously, if you need the money, don't spend it on this. And I'm not going to talk you through all the details of how you set it up. Go to that link and have a look for yourself. Before you give any money to anyone because some guy on the internet said it was a good idea, you should absolutely go and check out all the details yourself. Don't just take my word for it that it's a good idea. But if you can afford to give a regular contribution and you are comfortable using Patreon, this feels to me like a good way to promote this development project and in fact to promote wargames in general. Anyway, on to Space Empires 4X. I'm going to be literally showing you a screen recording of me playing the game, and I'm going to be talking you through the solo mode and some of the interface and game features today. I might occasionally digress into a bit of talk about strategy, but today is mostly about explaining the game and the interface. From the main page on Board Game Arena, you need to click on Play Now. Then you need to go to Space Empires 4X and create a new table. You might have to bring Space Empires 4X up for this. Down the left-hand side, you have a series of different options, and the most important of which is the scenario. In this case, that will allow me to set that I want to play the solo player Doomsday scenario. There are scenarios covering 1 to 4 players in various different arrangements. There are then various options associated with that. The most important option is whether you're using the basic or advanced rules. And for this game, I'm going to be using just the basic rules. Once you've clicked on all of that, click on Go to Game, and it will load up the main game screen, which you can see here. You can see the board, which is laid out with your starting colony at the center, and then a series of small squares indicating unexplored space around the edge. And then just beyond that is where the Doomsday machine will appear later in the scenario. At the top of the screen is a zoom control, which you can use to zoom in and out on the board to get a clearer view of what's going on, either a zoomed out overview or zoomed in to see the details of ships in the actual center. On the right hand side, there's various information about your faction, including its current money, income, etc., and which technologies you have available. And on the bottom right, there is the game log. This will record actions that you have undertaken. To move a unit, you click on a unit and then you click on the space that it wants to move to. When you click on the unit, it will highlight spaces it can move to. When you're entering unexplored space, you have to stop immediately. So obviously at the beginning here, all you can actually do is send your 3 scout ships out to the adjacent spaces. In this case, I discover 2 planets and a mineral resource. The mining ship can be sent out to collect the mineral source, take it back to a colony and provide you with 5 production points as a one-off boost. The colony ships can be sent out to planets that aren't barren and can then develop new colonies on those. There is a distinct colonization phase, but you can do it in the main phase. You just click on a colony ship that's sitting on an uncolonized planet, and then at the top of the screen there's an option that says, do you want to colonize it? And you click on that. For miners, when they move into space that contains a mineral, you just click on the mining ship and click tow mineral, and the mineral is then moved to on the ship, and then you can move the ship to a colony, and similarly press on the mining ship, then press on the space at the top where it'll say deposit mineral. Every 3 turns, there is an economics phase. When an economics phase occurs, you get this little pop-up box, which will list on the right-hand side your different colonies. On the top left, an income spreadsheet. You get money for each colony, money one-off for mining, and so on. And in the bottom left, your options for technology development. If you want to build something at a colony, you click on the colony and then different options appear at the top of the screen for what you can build. On a colony that doesn't have shipyards, essentially you can only build shipyards. You can build one shipyard each economic phase at each colony. If the colony does have shipyards and your homeworld starts with shipyards, then you can build colony ships. At the beginning of the game, basically all you do is build colony ships until you have managed to colonize all of the planets in your initial home system. There are 8 planets available in the home system to be colonized, and you begin with 3 colony ships and can usually build 2 in the first economic phase and 3 in the second economic phase, which means that you have usually succeeded in completing your colonization by the beginning of the third economic phase. That's turn 9 of the game. As you get to the edge of your system, you'll notice that the little square markers that indicate unexplored space change colour. There's essentially 2 sets of markers. There's the markers for your home system, which contains the set of colonizable planets that you have available, and then there are markers for deep space, which will only contain barren planets and might contain dangers. It may also contain mineral resources or technologies. Usually in deep space, mineral resources are worth 10, whereas in your space they're only worth 5. In doomsday scenarios, my general attitude is that I just don't really bother going into deep space. Essentially just explore my home system and set up a defensive network, because all you're trying to do in the solo scenario is survive 3 consecutive attacks by the automated doomsday machines. Your second economics phase, like your first economics phase, is essentially going to be spent building colony ships. So essentially your first 9 turns of the game are just spent colonizing, and you don't do anything else particularly interesting. And this is broadly true regardless of whether you're playing a solo scenario or playing against other human beings. Once you've completed setting up your various colonies, you've got an economic base from which to work. There are now essentially 2 steps to what is going on. First of all, you need to buy any technology that you plan to include on your ships. You buy this first because ships themselves have an upkeep cost, and you don't want to have to be paying for the upkeep while you're buying the technology. In this game, I choose to upgrade the ship size technology by 1 level and the attack technology by 1 level. The reason for that is fairly simple. Upgrading the ship size by 1 level gives me access to base stations, which are very powerful defensive units, and ultimately I'm defending, and access to destroyers, which are superior to scouts. Upgrading the attack technology by 1 level adds +1 to my dice rolls for actually hitting the enemy ships, and the maximum that a destroyer can benefit from is that +1. So I get those 2 technologies first before I start building actual destroyers. Okay, so I need to explain a little bit about the next step I'm doing. What I'm doing here is building shipyards. There is a counter limit in effect for all of your types of ship in the game. So with shipyards, you can only have shipyards in 4 locations. One of those, of course, because you start with 4 shipyards, is your home world. I am selecting the 3 planets I think are most likely to be attacked first by the Doomsday Machine. So effectively 1 planet on each front, because the Doomsday Machine's arrival is random. And then I will be building shipyards at each of those locations, which will do 2 things. It means if the Doomsday Machine appears and moves towards that planet, I can build destroyers there. It also means that the planet's defences themselves are upgraded, because each shipyard basically fights like a scout. So it adds further to the defensive capability. So in a moment, we'll be moving into the second half of the Doomsday scenario. Actual Doomsday Machines will appear and they will move towards the nearest colony, and I will have to fight them. And I have to survive 3 successive Doomsday Machines. The difficulty level of the scenario controls when the Doomsday Machines arrive and the combat power of those Doomsday Machines when they get here. And that's illustrated in 3 tables in the rulebook. The Doomsday Machine arrives. If you're not paying attention to the exact number of turns, it's turn 18, it's the 6th economic phase, then pay attention to the game log on the right-hand side. That will alert you to the arrival of a Doomsday Machine, which happens at the beginning of the economic phase, and that means you can respond to it immediately. You scan around the board, work out where it is, establish, as in this case, that it's going to attack the colony at Orion first, and then you both build and rush things to the Orion colony. So you build everything you can that will defend the Orion colony, and you rush anything else that can get there in time for the Doomsday Machine, which means essentially anything that can arrive there in 3 moves. I've massed everything I can to defend Orion, multiple groups of ships, the shipyards themselves, which fight a small ship, a base station, and all I can do now is just wait for the Doomsday Machine to move in and begin its attack. The battle board appears once you're actually engaged in a combat. Units attack in the initiative order based on their letter, A first, then B, C, D, and E. And units have an attack number printed on their counter. That's the number they normally need to hit. That gets modified if the opposing unit has a defense value, which reduces the number to hit, but you always hit on a 1 on a d10. And when you hit, you allocate the hits to an enemy unit, which for you as the solo player is easy because there is 1 Doomsday Machine and it will take a lot of hits to kill, and it also, unlike your ships, gets to dish out multiple hits. The Doomsday Machine will just allocate its hits automatically to your vessels. You can allocate your attacks manually by clicking on a vessel, then clicking on the target. The combat calculation and the dice roll and whether or not you hit are listed in the log. If an enemy ship is hit, then it's marked with a yellow hit indicator. Or, if you want to, you can use the combat doctrine interface. And this will essentially set up that you're automatically going to assign hits in a certain way. And that works absolutely fine in this scenario. It works fine in a lot of general scenarios and it can speed play up. When you're initially playing, you're probably going to want to do most things manually until you've got a good idea about the choices you make in combat, and only then switch to using the combat doctrine. I see off the first Doomsday Machine fairly easily. As you can see, I've still got 9 operational destroyers left after that, so I'll have a little bit more time to wait for the next Doomsday Machine to show up, and then I will attempt to engage that in a similar sort of way. I get lucky with the arrival of the second Doomsday Machine because it turns up in exactly the same location as the first Doomsday Machine, which means it'll be running head-on into the defences that I'd already built. And exactly the same procedure. Orion is going to be the first colony that's attacked, so I build up as much strength as possible at Orion in this economic phase and in the subsequent movement phases, and just wait for the attack to land. As you can see, the second Doomsday Machine is stronger than the first Doomsday Machine, and this is always the case. The 3 Doomsday Machines get progressively stronger, and you have to ramp up your defences to match that. Obviously, the idea is that you concentrate your forces so that some of those forces survive each attack and are available to engage the next one. And pretty much like the first time, I don't have any great difficulty seeing off this Doomsday Machine. This is not a particularly high difficulty setting. I had this set for to show you the procedure, partly because I didn't want the embarrassment of being totally destroyed. I wanted to be able to get to the end of the scenario to show you how it works all the way through. The strategy for the third Doomsday Machine is slightly different. For the third machine, I make no attempt to hold the outer colonies, but retreat all of my forces back to my main homeworld to mount a defence there. There's a very simple reason for this. About 2/3 of your economic power comes from your colonies, so your ability to build new ships and ramp up your forces is dependent on holding your colonies. So for the first 2 machines, you need to meet them at the outer colonies and protect your colonies. But for the third machine, the scenario ends if you beat it. And if you retreat to your homeworld, you gain usually a whole extra turn, and you get to gather all of your forces in one place. So it's generally a lot easier to defeat the machine. It is, by the way, never worth engaging the Doomsday Machines piecemeal. Every time they eat a planet, they gain back some of their health. You can't just kind of throw a few units at it and whittle it down a bit and then throw a few more units at it. Whenever you're fighting it, you have to concentrate all of your forces. And that's what I do here, to concentrate everything I have left at the homeworld, ready for one final showdown with the third and most powerful Doomsday Machine. And as we can see, I'm pretty well prepared, and I destroyed the Doomsday Machine in a single round of combat. So, winning the scenario. If you're interested in Space Empires 4X as a game, I would suggest that you play a couple of games of the Doomsday Machine scenario. The hard difficulty is a reasonable place to start. You might want to start a little bit easier. If you manage to defeat it on a even harder difficulty than this, please feel free to leave a comment below saying how you did. It will give you an opportunity to get used to the interface and to have a good sense of what's going on with the game before you start trying to play against other human players. And as I said, for the purposes of the scenario, all the advanced rules do is make it easier for you to defeat the Doomsday Machines. in terms of difficulty, they don't do anything in the solo scenario. But this is a reasonable place to try out some of those advanced rules so that you become familiar with how, for example, merchant pipelines work, etc. Anyway, I'll probably be doing some more content on Space Empires 4X in the future, but for now, here endeth the lesson.